Relax and listen to the voice.
The Happy Family. The largest green leaf in this country is certainly the burdock leaf. If you hold it in front of you, it is large enough for an apron, and if you hold it over your head, it is almost as good as an umbrella. It is so wonderfully large. A burdock never grows alone. Where it grows, there are many more, and it is a splendid sight. And all this splendor is good for snails. The great white snails, which grand people in olden times used to have made into fricassees, and when they had eaten them, they would say, "Oh, what a delicious dish!" For these people really thought them good, and these snails lived on burdock leaves, and for them, the burdock was planted. There was once an old estate where no one now lived to require snails. Indeed, the owners had all died out, but the burdock still flourished. It grew over all the beds and walks of the garden. Its growth had no check, until it became at last quite a forest of burdocks. Here and there stood an apple or a plum tree, but for this, nobody would have thought the place had ever been a garden. It was burdock from one end to the other, and here lived the last two surviving snails. They knew not themselves how old they were, but they could remember the time when there were a great many more of them, and that they were descended from a family which came from foreign lands, and that the whole forest had been planted for them and theirs. They had never been away from the garden, but they knew that another place once existed in the world, called the Duke's Palace Castle, in which some of their relations had been boiled until they became black, and were then laid on a silver dish. But what was done afterwards they did not know. Besides, they could not imagine exactly how it felt to be boiled and placed on a silver dish, but no doubt it was something very fine and highly genteel. Neither the cockchafer, nor the toad, nor the earthworm, who they questioned about it, would give them the least information, for none of their relations had ever been cooked or served on a silver dish. The old white snails were the most aristocratic race in the world, and they knew that. The forest had been planted for them, and the nobleman's castle had been built entirely that they might be cooked and laid on silver dishes. They lived quite retired and very happily, and as they had no children of their own, they had adopted a little common snail, which they brought up as their own child. The little one would not grow, for he was only a common snail, but the old people, particularly the mother snail, declared that she could easily see how he grew, and when the father said he could not perceive it, she begged him to feel the snail's little shell, and he did so, and found that the mother was right. One day it rained very fast. "Listen, what a drumming there is on the burdock leaves. Turn, 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 turn," said the father snail.
"There come the drops," said the mother. "They are trickling down the stalks. We shall have it very wet here presently. I am very glad we have such good houses, and that the little one has one of his own. There has been really more done for us than for any other creature. It is quite plain that we are the most noble people in the world. We have our houses from our birth, and the burdock forest has been planted for us. I should very much like to know how far it extends and what lies beyond it."
"There can be nothing better than we have here," said the father snail. "I wish for nothing more."
"Yes, but I do," said the mother. I should like to be taken to the palace and boiled and laid upon a silver dish, as was done to all of our ancestors. And you may be sure it must be something very uncommon."
"The nobleman's castle, perhaps, has fallen to decay," said the snail father, "or the burdock wood may have grown out. You need not be in a hurry. You are always so impatient. And the youngster there is just getting the same. He has been 3 days creeping to the top of that stalk. I feel quite giddy when I look at him."
"You must not scold him," said the mother snail. "He creeps so very carefully. He will be the joy of our home, and we old folks have nothing else to live for. But have you ever thought where we are to get a wife for him? Do you think that farther out in the wood there may be others of our race?"
"There may be black snails, no doubt," said the old snail. "Black snails without houses, but they are so vulgar and conceited, too. But we can give the ants a commission. They run here and there, as if they all had so much business to get through. They most likely will know of a wife for our youngster."
"I certainly know a most beautiful bride," said one of the ants. "But I fear it would not do, for she is a queen."
"That does not matter," said the old snail. "Has she a house?"
"She has a palace," replied the ant. "A most beautiful ant palace with 700 passages." "Thank you," said the mother snail. "But our boy shall not go to live in an ant-hill. If you know of nothing better, we will give the commission to the white gnats. They fly about in the rain and sunshine. They know the burdock wood from one end to the other." "We have a wife for him," said the gnats. 100 man steps from here, there is a little snail with a house, sitting on a gooseberry bush. She is quite alone and old enough to be married. It is only 100 man steps from here."
"Then let her come to him," said the old people. "He has the whole burdock forest. She has only a bush." So the gnats brought the little snail lady. She took 8 days to perform the journey, but that was just as it ought to be, for it showed her to be one of the right breeding. And then they had a wedding. 6 glowworms gave as much light as they could, but in other respects it was all very quiet, for the old snails could not bear festivities or a crowd. But a beautiful speech was made by the mother snail. The father could not speak, as he was too much overcome. And then they gave the whole burdock forest to the young snails as an inheritance, and repeated what they had so often said, that it was the finest place in the world, and that if they led upright and honorable lives, and their family increased, they and their children might someday be taken to a nobleman's palace to be boiled black and laid on a silver dish. And when they had finished speaking, the old couple crept into their houses and came out no more, for they slept. The young snail pair now ruled the forest, and had numerous progeny. But as the young ones were never boiled or laid in silver dishes, they concluded that the castle had fallen into decay, and that all the people in the world were dead. And as nobody contradicted them, they thought that they must be right. And the rain fell upon the burdock leaves to play the drum for them, and the sun shone to paint colors on the burdock forest for them, and they were very happy. The whole family were entirely and perfectly happy. The Story of a Mother. A mother sat by her little child. She was very sad, for she feared it would die. It was quite pale, and its little eyes were closed, and sometimes it drew a heavy, deep breath, almost like a sigh, and then the mother gazed more sadly than ever on the poor little creature. Someone knocked at the door, and a poor old man walked in. He was wrapped in something that looked like a great horse cloth, and he required it truly to keep him warm, for it was cold winter. The country everywhere lay covered with snow and ice, and the wind blew so sharply that it cut one's face. The little child had dozed off to sleep for a moment, and the mother, seeing that the old man shivered with the cold, rose and placed a small mug of beer on the stove to warm for him. The old man sat and rocked the cradle, and the mother seated herself on a chair near him and looked at her sick child, who still breathed heavily, and took hold of its little hand.
"You think I shall keep him, do you not?" she said. "Our all-merciful God will surely not take him away from me."
The old man, who was indeed Death himself, nodded his head in a peculiar manner, which might have signified either yes or no, and the mother cast down her eyes, while the tears rolled down her cheeks. Then her head became heavy, for she had not closed her eyes for 3 days and nights, and she slept, but only for a moment. Shivering with cold, she started up and looked around the room. The old man was gone, and her child, it was gone too. The old man had taken it with him. In the corner of the room, the old clock began to strike. Whoosh! Went the chains. The heavy weight sank to the ground, and the clock stopped, and the poor mother rushed out of the house calling for her child. Out in the snow sat a woman in long black garments, and she said to the mother,
"Death has been with you in your room. I saw him hastening away with your child. He strides faster than the wind, and never brings back what he has taken away." "Only tell me which way he has gone,"
said the mother.
"Tell me the way. I will find him." "I know the way," said the woman in black garments. "But before I tell you, you must sing to me all the songs that you have sung to your child. I love these songs. I have heard them before. I am Night, and I saw your tears flow as you sang." "I will sing them all to you," said the mother. "But do not detain me now. I must overtake him and find my child."
But Night sat silent and still, and then the mother wept and sang and wrung her hands, and there were so many songs, and yet even more tears, until at length Night said, "Go to the right, into the dark forest of fir trees, for I saw Death take that road with your little child." Within the wood the mother came to a crossroads, and she knew not which way to take. Just by stood a thorn bush. It had neither leaf nor flower, for it was cold winter time, and icicles hung on the branches. "Have you not seen Death go by with my little child?" she asked. "Yes," replied the thorn bush, "but I will not tell you which way he has taken until you have warmed me in your bosom. I am freezing to death here and turning to ice." Then she pressed the bramble to her bosom quite close, so that it might be thawed, and the thorns pierced her flesh, and great drops of blood flowed. But the bramble shot forth fresh green leaves, and they became flowers on the cold winter's night, so warm as the heart of a sorrowing mother. Then the bramble bush told her the path she must take. She came at length to a great lake, on which there was neither ship nor boat to be seen. The lake was not frozen sufficiently for her to pass over on the ice, nor was it open enough for her to wade through, and yet she must cross it if she wished to find her child. Then she laid herself down to drink up the water of the lake, which was, of course, impossible for any human being to do, but the bereaved mother thought that perhaps a miracle might take place to help her.
"You will never succeed in this," said the lake. "Let us make an arrangement together which will be better. I love to collect pearls, and your eyes are the purest I have ever seen. If you will weep those eyes away in tears into my waters, then I will take you to the large hothouse where death dwells and rears flowers and trees, every one which is a human life."
"Oh, what I would not give to reach my child,"
said the weeping mother. And as she still continued to weep, her eyes fell into the depths of the lake and became 2 costly pearls. Then the lake lifted her up and wafted her across to the opposite shore as if she were on a swing, where stood a wonderful building many miles in length. No one could tell whether it was a mountain covered with forests and full of caves, or whether it had been built. But the poor mother could not see, for she had wept her eyes into the lake.
"Where shall I find Death, who went away with my little child?"
she asked.
"He has not arrived here yet,"
said an old gray-haired woman who was walking about and watering Death's hothouse.
"Have you found your way here, and who helped you?" "God has helped me," she replied. "He is merciful. Will you not be merciful too? Where shall I find my little child?" "I did not know the child,"
said the old woman.
"and you are blind. Many flowers and trees have faded tonight, and Death will soon come to transplant them. You know already that every human being has a life tree or a life flower, just as may be ordained for him. They look like other plants, but they have hearts that beat. Children's hearts also beat. From that, you may perhaps be able to recognize your child. But what will you give me if I tell you what more you will have to do?" "I have nothing to give,"
said the afflicted mother.
"but I would go to the ends of the earth for you." "I can give you nothing to do for me there,"
said the old woman.
"but you can give me your long black hair. You know yourself that it is beautiful, and it pleases me. You can take my white hair in exchange, which will be something in return." "Do you ask for nothing more than that?"
said she.
"I will give it to you with pleasure."
And she gave up her beautiful hair and received in return the white locks of the old woman. They went into Death's vast hothouse, where flowers and trees grew together in wonderful profusion. Blooming hyacinths under glass bells, and peonies like strong trees. There were water plants, some quite fresh, and others looking sickly, which had water snakes twining round them, and black crabs clinging to their stems. There stood noble palm trees, oaks and plantains, and beneath them bloomed thyme and parsley. Each tree and flower had a name. Each represented a human life, and belonged to men still living. Some in China, others in Greenland, and in all parts of the world. Some large trees had been planted in little pots, so that they were cramped for room, and seemed about to burst the pot to pieces, while many weak little flowers were growing in rich soil with moss all around them, carefully tended and cared for. The sorrowing mother bent over the little plants and heard the human heart beating in each, and recognized the beatings of her child's heart among millions of others.
"That is it!"
she cried, stretching out her hands towards a little crocus flower which hung down its sickly head.
"Do not touch the flower!"
exclaimed the old woman.
"But place yourself here, and when death comes, I expect him every minute. Do not let him pull up that plant, but threaten him that if he does, you will serve the other flowers in the same manner. This will make him afraid, for he must account to God for each of them. None can be uprooted unless he receives permission to do so."
There rushed through the hothouse a chill of icy coldness, and the blind mother felt that death had arrived.
"How did you find your way hither?"
asked he.
"How could you come here faster than I have?"
"I am a mother,"
she answered, and Death stretched out his hand towards the delicate little flower, but she held her hands tightly round it and held it fast at the same time with the most anxious care lest she could touch one of the leaves. Then Death breathed upon her hands, and she felt his breath colder than the icy wind, and her hands sank down powerless.
"You cannot prevail against me," said Death.
"But a God of mercy can,"
said she.
"I only do his will,"
replied Death.
"I am his gardener. I take all his flowers and trees and transplant them into the gardens of paradise in an unknown land. How they flourish there, and what that garden resembles, I may not tell you."
"Give me back my child,"
said the mother, weeping and imploring, and she seized two beautiful flowers in her hands and cried to Death,
"I will tear up all your flowers, for I am in despair."
"Do not touch them," said Death. "You say you are unhappy, and would you make another mother as unhappy as yourself?"
"Another mother?"
cried the poor woman, setting the flowers free from her hands.
"There are your eyes," said Death. "I fished them up out of the lake for you. They were shining brightly, but I knew not that they were yours. Take them back. They are clearer now than before, and then look into the deep well which is close by here. I will tell you the names of the two flowers which you wish to pull up, and you will see the whole future of the human beings they represent, and what you are about to frustrate and destroy."
Then she looked into the well, and it was a glorious sight to behold how one of them became a blessing to the world, and how much happiness and joy it spread around. But she saw that the life of the other was full of care and poverty, misery and woe.
"Both are the will of God," said Death.
"Which is the unhappy flower, and which is the blessed one?"
she said.
"That I may not tell you," said Death. "But thus far you may learn that one of the two flowers represents your own child. It was the fate of your child that you saw, the future of your own child."
Then the mother screamed aloud with terror.
"Which one of them belongs to my child? Tell me that! Deliver the unhappy child! Release it from so much misery!" Rather take it away. Take it to the kingdom of God. Forget my tears and my entreaties. Forget all that I have said and done.
I do not understand you, said Death. Will you have your child back, or shall I carry him away to the place that you do not know?
Then the mother wrung her hands, fell on her knees, and prayed to God.
Grant not my prayers when they are contrary to thy will, which at all times must be the best. Oh, hear them not.
And her head sank on her bosom, and then Death carried away her child to the unknown land. The Shirt Collar. There was once a fine gentleman who possessed, among other things, a boot-jack and a hairbrush, but he had also the finest shirt collar in the world, and of this collar we are about to hear a story. The collar had become so old that he began to think about getting married, and one day he happened to find himself in the same washing tub as a garter.
Upon my word, said the shirt collar, I have never seen anything so slim and delicate, so neat and soft before. May I venture to ask your name?
I shall not tell you,
replied the garter.
Where do you reside when you are at home?
asked the shirt collar, but the garter was naturally shy and did not know how to answer such a question.
I presume you are a girdle,
said the shirt collar.
A sort of undergirdle. I see that you are useful as well as ornamental, my little lady.
You must not speak to me,
said the garter.
I do not think I have given you any encouragement to do so.
Oh, when anyone is as beautiful as you are,
said the shirt collar,
is not that encouragement enough?
Get away! Don't come so near me,
said the garter.
You appear to me quite like a man.
I am a finely gentleman, certainly,
said the shirt collar.
I possess a boot-jack and a hairbrush.
This was not true, for these things belonged to his master, but he was a boaster.
Don't come so near me,
said the garter.
I am not accustomed to it.
Affectation,
said the shirt collar. Then they were taken out of the wash-tub, starched, and hung over a chair in the sunshine, and then laid on an ironing board. And now came the glowing iron.
Mistress Widow,
said the shirt collar.
Little Mistress Widow, I feel quite warm. I am changing. I am losing all my creases. You're burning a hole in me. I propose to you.
You old rag,
said the flat iron, driving proudly over the collar, for she fancied herself a steam engine, which rolls over the railway and draws carriages.
You old rag,
said she. The edges of the shirt collar were a little frayed, so the scissors were brought to cut them smooth.
Oh!
exclaimed the shirt collar.
What a first-rate dancer you would make! You can stretch out your legs so well. I never saw anything so charming. I'm sure no human being could do the same.
I should think not,
replied the scissors.
You ought to be a countess,
said the shirt collar.
But all I possess consists of a fine gentleman, a boot-jack, and a comb. I wish I had an estate for your sake.
What is he going to propose to me?
said the scissors, and she became so angry that she cut too sharply into the shirt collar, and it was obliged to be thrown away as useless.
I shall be obliged to propose to the hairbrush,
thought the shirt collar. So he remarked one day, "It is wonderful what beautiful hair you have, my little lady. Have you never thought of being engaged?"
You might know I should think of it, answered the hairbrush. I am engaged to the bootjack.
"Engaged?" cried the shirt collar. "Now there is no one left to propose to." And then he pretended to despise all love-making. A long time passed, and the shirt collar was taken in a bag to the paper mill. Here was a large company of rags, the fine ones lying by themselves, separated from the coarser, as it ought to be. They had all many things to relate, especially the shirt collar, who was a terrible boaster. "I have had an immense number of love affairs," said the shirt collar. "No one left me any peace. It is true, I was a very fine gentleman, quite stuck up. I had a bootjack and a brush that I never used. You should have seen me then, when I was turned down. I shall never forget my first love. She was a girdle, so charming and fine and soft, and she threw herself into a washing tub for my sake. There was a widow, too, who was warmly in love with me, but I left her alone, and she became quite black. The next was a first-rate dancer. She gave me the wound from which I still suffer. She was so passionate. Even my own hairbrush was in love with me, and lost all her hair through neglected love. Yes, I have had great experience of this kind, but my greatest grief was for the garter, the girdle I mean to say, that jumped into the washtub. I have a great deal on my conscience, and it is really time I should be turned into white paper." And the shirt collar came to this at last. All the rags were made into white paper, and the shirt collar became the very identical piece of paper which we now see and on which this story was printed. It happened as a punishment to him for having boasted so shockingly of things which were not true. And this is a warning to us to be careful how we act, for we may someday find ourselves in the rag bag to be turned into white paper, on which our whole story may be written, even its most secret actions. And it would not be pleasant to have to run about the world in the form of a piece of paper, telling everything we have done, like the boasting shirt collar. The Flax. The flax was in full bloom. It had pretty little blue flowers as delicate as the wings of a moth, or even more so. The sun shone, and the showers watered it, and this was just as good for the flax as it is for little children to be washed and then kissed by their mother. They look much prettier for it, and so did the flax.
"People say that I look exceedingly well," said the flax, "and that I am so fine and long that I shall make a beautiful piece of linen. How fortunate I am! It makes me so happy. It is such a pleasant thing to know that something can be made of me. How the sunshine cheers me, and how sweet and refreshing is the rain! My happiness overpowers me. No one in the world can feel happier than I am." "Oh, yes, no doubt," said the fern. "But you do not know the world yet as well as I do, for my sticks are knotty." And then it sung quite mournfully, "Snip, snap, snurr, bass, lure, the song is ended."
"No, it is not ended," said the flax. "Tomorrow the sun will shine, or the rain descend. I feel that I am growing. I feel that I am in full blossom. I am the happiest of all creatures." Well, one day some people came, who took hold of the flax and pulled it up by the roots. This was painful, and then it was laid in water as if they intended to drown it, and, after that, placed near a fire as if it were to be roasted. All of this was very shocking.
"We cannot expect to be happy always," said the flax. "By experiencing evil as well as good, we become wise."
And certainly there was plenty of evil in store for the flax. It was steeped and roasted and broken and combed. Indeed, it scarcely knew what was done to it. At last it was put on the spinning wheel. Went the spinning wheel so quickly that the flax could not collect its thoughts.
"Well, I have been very happy," he said in the midst of his pain, "and must be contented with the past."
And contented he remained till he was put on the loom and became a beautiful piece of white linen. All the flax, even to the last stalk, was used in making this one piece.
"Well, this is quite wonderful. I could not believe that I should be so favored by fortune. The fern was not wrong with its song of snip, snap, snurr, bass, lure. But the song is not ended yet. Oh, I am sure. It is only just beginning. How wonderful it is that after all I have suffered, I am made something of at last. I am the luckiest person in the world, so strong and fine, and how white, and what a length! This is something different to being a mere plant and bearing flowers. Then I had no attention, nor any water unless it rained. Now I am watched and taken care of. Every morning the maid turns me over, and I have a shower bath from the watering pot every evening. Yes, and the clergyman's wife noticed me, and said I was the best piece of linen in the whole parish. I cannot be happier than I am now." After some time the linen was taken into the house, placed under the scissors, and cut and torn into pieces, and then pricked with needles. This certainly was not pleasant, but at last it was made into 12 garments of that kind which people do not like to name, and yet everybody should wear one. "See now then," said the flax, "I have become something of importance. This was my destiny. It is quite a blessing. Now I shall be of some use in the world, as everyone ought to be. It is the only way to be happy. I am now divided into 12 pieces, and yet we are all one and the same in the whole dozen. It is most extraordinary good fortune." Years passed away, and at last the linen was so worn it could scarcely hold together. "It must end very soon," said the pieces to each other. "We would have gladly held together a little longer, but it is useless to expect impossibilities." And at length they fell into rags and tatters, and thought it was all over with them, for they were torn to shreds, and steeped in water, and made into a pulp, and dried. And they knew not what besides, till all at once they found themselves beautiful white paper. "Well now, this is a surprise, a glorious surprise too," said the paper. "I am now finer than ever, and I shall be written upon, and who can tell what fine things I may have written upon me? This is wonderful luck." And sure enough, the most beautiful stories and poetry were written upon it, and only once was there a blot, which was very fortunate. Then people heard the stories and poetry read, and it made them wiser and better, for all that was written had a good and sensible meaning, and a great blessing was contained in the words on this paper. "I never imagined anything like this," said the paper.
When I was only a little blue flower growing in the fields, how could I fancy that I should ever be the means of bringing knowledge and joy to man? I cannot understand it myself, and yet it is really so. Heaven knows that I have done nothing myself but what I was obliged to do with my weak powers for my own preservation, and yet I've been promoted from one joy and honor to another. Each time I think that the song is ended, and then something higher and better begins for me. I suppose I shall now be sent on my travels about the world, so that people may read me. It cannot be otherwise. Indeed, it is more than probable, for I have more splendid thoughts written upon me than I had pretty flowers in olden times. I am happier than ever. But the paper did not go on its travels. It was sent to the printer, and all the words written upon it were set up in type to make a book, or rather, many hundreds of books, for so many more persons could derive pleasure and profit from a printed book than from the written paper, and if the paper had been sent around the world, it would have been worn out before it got halfway through its journey. "This is certainly the wisest plan," said the written paper. "I really did not think of that. I shall remain at home and be held in honor like some old grandfather, as I really am to all these new books. They will do some good. I could not have wandered about as they do, yet he who wrote all this has looked at me, as every word flowed from his pen upon my surface. I am the most honored of all." And then the paper was tied in a bundle with the other papers and thrown into a tub that stood in the wash-house. "After work, it's well to rest," said the paper, "and a very good opportunity to collect one's thoughts. Now I am able, for the first time, to think of my real condition and to know oneself as true progress. What will be done with me now, I wonder? No doubt I should still go forward. I have always progressed hitherto, as I know quite well." Now it happened one day that all the paper in the tub was taken out and laid on the hearth to be burnt. People said that it could not be sold at the shop to wrap up butter and sugar because it had been written upon. The children in the house stood round the stove, for they wanted to see the paper burn because it flamed up so prettily. And afterwards, among the ashes, so many red sparks could be seen running one after the other, here and there, as quick as the wind. They called it seeing the children come out of school, and the last spark was the schoolmaster. They often thought the last spark had come, and one would cry, "There goes the schoolmaster!" But the next moment another spark would appear, shining so beautifully. How they would like to know where the sparks all went to. Perhaps we shall find out someday, but we don't know now. The whole bundle of paper had been placed on the fire and was soon alight. "Ugh!" cried the paper as it burst into a bright flame. "Ugh!" It was certainly not very pleasant to be burning, but when the whole was wrapped in flames, the flames mounted up into the air, higher than the flax had ever been able to raise its little blue flower, and they glistened as the white linen never could have glistened. All the written letters became quite red in a moment, and all the words and thoughts turned to fire. "Now I am mounting straight up to the sun," said a voice in the flames, and it was as if 1,000 voices echoed the words, and the flames darted up through the chimney and went out at the top. Then a number of tiny beings, as many in number as the flowers on the flax had been, and invisible to mortal eyes, floated above them. They were even lighter and more delicate than the flowers from which they were born, and as the flames were extinguished, and nothing remained of the paper but black ashes, these little beings danced upon it, and whenever they touched it, bright red sparks appeared. "The children are all out of school, and the schoolmaster was the last of all," said the children. It was good fun, and they sang over the dead ashes. Snip, snap, snore, face, lure. The song is ended. But the invisible being said, "The song is never ended. The most beautiful is yet to come." But the children could neither hear nor understand this, nor should they, for the children must not know everything. The Phoenix Bird. In the Garden of Paradise, beneath the Tree of Knowledge, bloomed a rose bush. Here, in the first rose, a bird was born. His flight was like the flashing of light, his plumage was beauteous, and his song ravishing. But when Eve plucked the fruit of the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, when she and Adam were driven from paradise, there fell from the flaming sword of the cherub a spark into the nest of the bird, which blazed up forthwith. The bird perished in the flames, but from the red egg in the nest there fluttered aloft a new one, the one solitary phoenix bird. The fable tells that he dwells in Arabia, and that every 100 years he burns himself to death in his nest. But each time a new phoenix, the only one in the world, rises up from the red egg. The bird flutters around us, swift as light, beauteous in color, and charming in song. When a mother sits by her infant's cradle, he stands on the pillow, and with his wings forms a glory around the infant's head. He flies through the chamber of content and brings sunshine into it, and the violets on the humble table smell doubly sweet. But the phoenix is not the bird of Arabia alone. He wings his way in the glimmer of the northern lights over the plains of Lapland and hops among the yellow flowers in the short Greenland summer. Beneath the copper mountains of Fablin and England's coal mines he flies, in the shape of a dusty moth, over the hymn book that rests on the knees of the pious miner. On a lotus leaf he floats down the sacred waters of the Ganges, and the eye of the Hindu maid gleams bright when she beholds him. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? The bird of paradise, the holy swan of song. On the car of Thespis he sat in the guise of a chattering raven and flapped his black wings, smeared with the lees of wine. Over the sounding harp of Iceland swept the swan's red beak. On Shakespeare's shoulder he sat in the guise of Odin's raven and whispered in the poet's ear, "Immortality!" And at the minstrel's feast he fluttered through the halls of the Wartburg. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? He sang to thee the Marseillaise, and thou kissedst the pen that fell from his wing. He came the radiance of paradise, and perchance thou didst turn away from him towards the sparrow who sat with tinsel on his wings. The bird of paradise, renewed each century, born in flame and ending in flame. Thy picture in a golden frame hangs in the halls of the rich, but thou thyself often fliest around, lonely and disregarded, a myth as the phoenix of Arabia. In paradise, when thou wert born in the first rose, beneath the tree of knowledge, thou receivest a kiss, and thy right name was given thee. Thy name, Poetry. A story. In the garden all the apple trees were in blossom. They had hastened to bring forth flowers before they got green leaves, and in the yard all the ducklings walked up and down, and the cat too. It basked in the sun and licked the sunshine from its own paws. And when one looked at the fields, how beautifully the corn stood, and how green it shone, without comparison. and there was a twittering and a fluttering of all the little birds, as if the day were a great festival. And so it was, for it was Sunday. All the bells were ringing, and all the people went to church, looking cheerful and dressed in their best clothes. There was a look of cheerfulness on everything. The day was so warm and beautiful that one might well have said, God's kindness to us men is beyond all limits. But inside the church, the pastor stood in the pulpit and spoke very loudly and angrily. He said that all men were wicked, and God would punish them for their sins, and that the wicked, when they died, would be cast into hell to burn forever and ever. He spoke very excitedly, saying that their evil propensities would not be destroyed, nor would the fire be extinguished, and they should never find rest. That was terrible to hear, and he said it in such a tone of conviction. He described hell to them as a miserable hole where all the refuse of the world gathers. There was no air besides the hot, burning sulfur flame, and there was no ground under their feet. They, the wicked ones, sank deeper and deeper, while eternal silence surrounded them. It was dreadful to hear all of that, for the preacher spoke from his heart, and all the people in the church were terrified. Meanwhile, the birds sang merrily outside, and the sun was shining so beautifully warm. It seemed as though every little flower said, God, thy kindness towards us all is without limits. Indeed, outside it was not at all like the pastor's sermon. The same evening, upon going to bed, the pastor noticed his wife sitting there quiet and pensive. "What is the matter with you?" he asked her.
Well, the matter with me is, she said, that I cannot collect my thoughts and am unable to grasp the meaning of what you said today in the church, that there are so many wicked people and that they should burn eternally. Alas, eternally? How long? I am only a woman and a sinner before God, but I should not have the heart to let even the worst sinner burn forever. And how could our Lord to do so, who is so infinitely good, and who knows how the wickedness comes from without and within? No, I am unable to imagine that, although you say so.
It was autumn. The trees dropped their leaves. The earnest and severe pastor sat at the bedside of a dying person. A pious, faithful soul closed her eyes forever. She was the pastor's wife. "If anyone shall find rest in the grave and mercy before our Lord, you shall certainly do so," said the pastor. He folded her hands and read a psalm over the dead woman. She was buried. 2 large tears rolled over the cheeks of the earnest man, and in the parsonage it was empty and still, for its sun had set forever. She had gone home. It was night. A cold wind swept over the pastor's head. He opened his eyes, and it seemed to him as if the moon was shining into his room. It was not so. However, there was a being standing before his bed, and looking like the ghost of his deceased wife. She fixed her eyes upon him with such a kind and sad expression, just as if she wished to say something to him. The pastor raised himself in bed and stretched his arms towards her, saying, "Not even you can find eternal rest? You suffer, you best and most pious woman?" The dead woman nodded her head as if to say yes, and put her hand on her breast. "And I cannot obtain rest in the grave for you?" "Yes," again was the answer. "And how?"
Give me one hair, only a single hair, from the head of the sinner for whom the fire shall never be extinguished, of the sinner whom God will condemn to eternal punishment in hell."
"Yes, One ought to be able to redeem you so easily, you pure, pious woman, said the pastor.
Follow me, said the dead woman. It is thus granted to us. By my side, you will be able to fly wherever your thoughts wish to go. Invisible to men, we shall penetrate into their most secret chambers. But with sure hand, you must find out him who is destined to eternal torture, and before the cock crows, he must be found.
As quickly as if carried by the winged thoughts, they were in the great city, and from the walls the names of the deadly sins shone in flaming letters. Pride, avarice, drunkenness, wantonness. In short, the whole seven-colored bow of sin.
Yes, therein, as I believed, as I knew it, said the pastor, are living those who are abandoned to the eternal fire.
And they were standing before the magnificently illuminated gate. The broad steps were adorned with carpets and flowers, and dance music was sounding through the festive halls. A footman, dressed in silken velvet, stood with a large silver-mounted rod near the entrance.
Our ball can compare favorably with the king's,
he said, and turned with contempt towards the gazing crowd in the street. What he actually thought was sufficiently expressed in his features and movements.
Miserable beggars who are looking in, you are nothing in comparison to me. Pride, said the dead woman. Do you see him?
The footman? Asked the pastor. He is but a poor fool, and not doomed to be tortured eternally by fire. Only a fool.
It sounded through the whole house of Pride. They were all fools there. Then they flew within the four naked walls of the miser. Lean as a skeleton, trembling with cold and hunger, the old man was clinging with all his thoughts to his money. They saw him jump up feverishly from his miserable couch and take a loose stone out of the wall. There lay gold coins in an old stocking. They saw him anxiously feeling over an old ragged coat in which pieces of gold were sewn, and his clammy fingers trembled.
He is ill! That is madness! A joyless madness! Besieged by fear and dreadful dreams!
They quickly went away and came before the beds of the criminals. These unfortunate people slept side by side in long rows. Like a ferocious animal, one of them rose out of his sleep, uttered a horrible cry, and gave his comrade a violent dig in the ribs with his pointed elbow. And this one turned around in his sleep.
Be quiet, monster! Sleep! This happens every night!
Every night, repeated the others.
Yes, every night he comes and tortures me. In my violence I have done this and that. I was born with an evil mind which has brought me hither for the second time. But if I have done wrong, I suffer punishment for it. One thing, however, I have not yet confessed. When I came out a little while ago and passed by the yard of my former master, evil thoughts rose within me when I remembered this and that. I struck a match a little bit on the wall. Probably it came a little too close to the thatched roof. All burnt down. A great heat rose, such as sometimes overcomes me. I myself helped to rescue cattle and things. Nothing alive burned except a flight of pigeons, which flew into the fire, and the yard dog, of which I had not thought. One could hear him howl out of the fire, and this howling I still hear when I wish to sleep. And when I have fallen asleep, the great rough dog comes and places himself upon me and howls, presses and tortures me. Now listen to what I tell you. You can snore. You're snoring the whole night, and I hardly a quarter of an hour.
and the blood rose to the head of the excited criminal. He threw himself upon his comrade and beat him with his clenched fist in the face. "Wicked Mats has become mad again," they said amongst themselves. The other criminal seized him, wrestled with him, and bent him double, so that his head rested between his knees, and they tied him so that the blood almost came out of his eyes and out of all his pores.
"You are killing the unfortunate man,"
said the pastor, and as he stretched out his hand to protect him who had already suffered too much, the scene changed. They flew through rich halls and wretched hovels, wantonness and envy. All the deadly sins passed before them. An angel of justice read their crimes in their defense. The latter was not a brilliant one, but it was read before God, who reads the heart, who knows everything, the wickedness that comes from within and from without, who is mercy and love personified. The pastor's hand trembled. He dared not stretch it out. He did not venture to pull a hair out of the sinner's head, and tears gushed from his eyes like the stream of mercy and love, the cooling waters of which extinguished the eternal fire of hell. And just then the cock crowed.
"Father of all mercy, grant thou to her the peace that I was unable to procure for her."
"I have it now," said the dead woman. "It was your hard words, your despair of mankind, your gloomy belief in God and His creation, which drove me to you. Learn to know mankind. Even in the wicked ones lives a part of God, and this extinguishes and conquers the flame of hell."
The pastor felt a kiss on his lips. A gleam of light surrounded him. God's bright sun shone into the room, and his wife, alive, sweet and full of love, awoke him from a dream which God had sent him. The Pigs. Dear Charles Dickens once told us the story of the pig, and since that time it has put us in good humor just to hear one grunt. St. Anthony took the pig under his protection, and when we think of the prodigal son, our thoughts promptly carry us into the midst of a pigsty. And it was, as a matter of fact, in front of a pigsty that our carriage stopped over in Sweden. Out near the highway, close beside the house, the farmer had put his pigsty, and another like it could scarcely have been found in the world. It had been an old state carriage. The seats had been removed and the wheels taken off, so that the body of the old coach stood on its stomach, and 4 pigs were shut up inside of it. Whether these were the first that had ever been in there, one couldn't ascertain, but that this had been born to be a stagecoach there was every evidence of, even to the damask rag that hung down from the roof, and that indeed bore witness of having seen better days. This is true, every blessed word. "Oink, oink," was said inside, and the coach creaked and groaned. It was indeed having a mournful end. "The beautiful is gone," it sighed and said, or at least that's what it might have said. We came back in the autumn, and the coach was still there, but the pigs were gone. They were now lords in the forest. Rain and storm reigned, the wind blowing all the leaves from the trees, and gave them neither peace nor rest. The birds of passage had flown. "The beautiful has gone," said the carriage, and all through nature the same sentiment was sighed, and even from the heart of man it sounded. The beautiful has gone. The glorious greenwood, the warm sunshine, and the song of the birds are gone, gone. so it was said, and it creaked in the trunks of the lofty trees, and a sigh, a very deep sigh, was heard right from the heart of the wild rose tree, and from him who sat there, the Rose King. Do you know him? He is all beard, the finest reddish-green beard, and he is good to know. Go to the wild rose bushes, and when all the flowers have faded from them in autumn, and only the red hips remain, you will often find among them a large red-green moss flower. That's the Rose King. A little green leaf grows out of the top of his head. That's his feather. He is the only man of his kind on the rose bush, and it was he who had sighed.
Gone, gone, the beautiful is gone. The roses have gone, and the leaves have fallen from the trees. It's wet here, it's rough here. The birds who sang are silent. The pigs go hunting acorns, and the pigs are the lords of the forest.
The nights were cold, and the days were gray, but the raven sat on the branch and sang nevertheless. Caw! Caw! Both raven and crow sat on the high bough. They had a large family, and all of them said, "Ah! Ah!" And of course, the majority is always right. In the hollow beneath the high tree was a great puddle, and here lay a herd of pigs, large and small ones. They found the place incomparably lovely. "Oui, oui," they said. This was the only French that they knew, but even that was something. They were so clever and so fat. The old ones lay still, for they were thinking. The young ones, on the other hand, were very busy and had no time for rest. One little piglet had a curl in his tail that was his mother's pride and joy. She thought that all the other pigs were looking at the curl and thinking only of the curl, but they weren't. They were thinking of themselves and what was useful to them and of what the forest was for. They had always heard that the acorns they ate grew at the roots of trees, and therefore they had always dug up the ground. But now there was a little pigget, always the young ones who come out with the new ideas, who insisted that the acorns dropped from the branches. One had fallen on his head, and that had given him the idea. He had then made the observations, and now he was quite sure of it. The older ones put their heads together. "Oink," said the pigs. "Oink, all the beauty is gone. The twittering of the birds has ended. We want fruit. Anything that's good to eat is good, and we eat everything." "Oui, oui," they all said together. But now the mother sow looked at her little piglet with the curl in its tail. "One mustn't forget the beautiful," she said. "Ah! Ah!" cried the crow, and flew down from the tree to try to get appointed as a nightingale. One happened to be needed, and so the crow was promptly appointed.
"Gone, gone! Ah!"
sighed the Rose King.
"All the beautiful is gone."
It was wet. It was gray. It was cold and windy, and through the forest and over the fields the rain beat down in long, murky streaks. Where were the birds who sang? Where were the flowers in the meadow, and the sweet berries of the wood? Gone. Gone. Then a light shone from the house of the forester. It lighted up like a star and cast its long rays through the trees. A song sounded from within the house. Beautiful children played there around the old grandfather. He sat with the Bible on his knee and read of God and the eternal life, and told them about the spring that would return, about the forest that would become green anew, the roses that would bloom, the nightingales that would sing, and the beautiful that again would sit upon the throne. But the Rose King did not hear it. He sat in the cold, wet weather and sighed, "Gone, gone." And the pigs were the lords of the forest, and Mother Sow looked at her little piglet with the curl in its tail.
"There's always somebody who has an appreciation of the beautiful,"
said the Mother Sow. The Puppet Show Man. On board a steamer, I once met an elderly man with such a merry face that, if it was really an index of his mind, he must have been the happiest fellow in creation, and indeed he considered himself so, for I heard it from his own mouth. He was a Dane, the owner of a traveling theater. He had all his company with him in a large box, for he was the proprietor of a puppet show. His inborn cheerfulness, he said, had been tested by a member of the Polytechnic Institution, and the experiment had made him completely happy. I did not at first understand all of this, but afterwards he explained the whole story to me, and here it is.
"I was giving a representation," he said, "in the hall of the posting house in the little town of Slagalees. There was a splendid audience, entirely juvenile, excepting 2 respectable matrons. All at once, a person in black, of student-like appearance, entered the room and sat down. He laughed aloud at the telling points, and applauded quite at the proper time. This was a very unusual spectator for me, and I felt anxious to know who he was. I heard that he was a member of the Polytechnic Institution in Copenhagen, who had been sent out to lecture to the people in the provinces. Punctually at 8 o'clock, my performance closed, for children must go to bed early, and a manager must also consult the convenience of the public. At 9 o'clock, the lecturer commenced his lecture and his experiments, and then I formed a part of his audience. It was wonderful both to hear and see. The greater part of it was beyond my comprehension, but it led me to think that if we men can acquire so much, we must surely be intended to last longer than the little span which extends only to the time when we are hidden away under this earth. His experiments were quite miracles on small scale, and yet the explanations flowed as naturally as water from his lips. At the time of Moses and the prophets, such a man would have been placed among the sages of the land. In the Middle Ages, they would have burned him at the stake. All night long I could not sleep, and the next evening, when I gave another performance and the lecturer was present, I was in one of my best moods. I once heard of an actor who, when he had to act the part of a lover, always thought of one particular lady in the audience. He only played for her and forgot all the rest of the house. And now the Polytechnic lecturer was my she, my only auditor, for whom alone I played. When the performance was over and the puppets were moved behind the curtain, the Polytechnic lecturer invited me into his room to take a glass of wine. He talked of my comedies and I of his science, and I believed we were both equally pleased. But I had the best of it, for there was much in what he did that he could not always explain to me. For instance, why a piece of iron which is rubbed on a cylinder should become magnetic. How does this happen? The magnetic sparks come to it, but how? It is the same with people in the world. They are rubbed about on this spherical globe till the electric spark comes upon them, and then we have a Napoleon or a Luther or someone of the kind. The whole world is but a series of miracles, said the lecturer, but we are so accustomed to them that we call them everyday matters. And he went on explaining things to me until my skull seemed lifted from my brain, and I declared that I were not such an old fellow. I would at once become a member of the Polytechnic institution, that I might learn to look at the bright side of everything, although I was one of the happiest men. One of the happiest? Said the lecturer, as if the idea pleased him. Are you really happy? He asked me. Yes, I replied, for I am welcomed in every town when I arrive with my company. But I certainly have one wish which sometimes weighs upon my cheerful temper like a mountain of lead. I should like to become the manager of a real theater and the director of a real troupe of men and women. He told me that he understood, and followed with, "You would like to have life breathed into your puppets, so that they might be living actors, and you their director." He then asked if that would leave me quite happy. I said that I believed so, but he did not, and we talked it over in all manner of ways, yet could not agree on the subject. However, the wine was excellent, and we clanked our glasses together as we drank. There must have been magic in it, or I should most certainly become tipsy, but that did not happen, for my mind seemed quite clear, and indeed a kind of sunshine filled the room, and beamed from the eyes of the Polytechnic lecturer. It made me think of the old stories when the gods, in their immortal youth, wandered upon this earth and paid visits to mankind. I said so to him, and he smiled, and I could have sworn that he was one of these ancient deities in disguise, or, at all events, that he belonged to the race of the gods. The result seemed to prove I was right in my suspicions, for it was arranged that my highest wish should be granted, that my puppets were to be gifted with life, and that I was to be the manager of a real company. We drank to my success and clanked our glasses, and then he packed all my dolls into a box and fastened it upon my back, and I felt as if I was spinning round in a circle, and presently found myself lying on the floor. I remember that quite well. And then the whole company sprang from the box. The spirit had come upon us all. The puppets had become distinguished actors. At least, so they said themselves. And I was their director. When all was ready for the first representation, the whole company requested permission to speak to me before appearing in public. The dancing lady said the house could not be supported unless she stood on one leg, for she was a great genius and begged to be treated as such. The lady who acted the part of the queen expected to be treated as a queen off of the stage as well as on it, or else she said she should get out of practice. The man whose duty it was to deliver a letter gave himself as many airs as he who took the part of first lover in the piece. He declared that the inferior parts were as important as the great ones, and deserving equal consideration as parts of an artistic whole. The hero of the piece would only play in a part containing points likely to bring down the applause of the house. The prima donna would only act when the lights were red, for she declared that a blue light did not suit her complexion. It was like a company of flies in a bottle, and I was in the bottle with them, for I was their director. My breath was taken away, my head whirled, and I was as miserable as a man could be. It was quite a novel, strange set of beings among whom I now found myself. I only wished I had them all in my box again, and that I had never been their director. So I told them roundly that, after all, they were nothing but puppets, and then they killed me. After a while, I found myself lying on my bed in my room, but how I got there, or how I got away at all from the Polytechnic professor, he may perhaps know. I don't. The moon shone upon the floor, the box lay open, and the dolls were all scattered about in great confusion. But I was not idle. I jumped off the bed, and into the box they all had to go. Some on their heads, some on their feet. Then I shut down the lid and seated myself upon the box. "Now you'll all have to stay," said I, "and I shall be cautious of how I wish you flesh and blood again." I felt quite light. My cheerfulness had returned, and I was again the happiest of mortals. The Polytechnic professor had fully cured me. I was as happy as a king, and went to sleep on the box. Next morning, correctly speaking, it was noon, for I slept remarkably late that day. I found myself still sitting there, in happy consciousness that my former wish had been a foolish one. I inquired for the Polytechnic professor, but he had disappeared like the Greek and Roman gods. From that time I have been the happiest man in the world. I am a happy director, for none of my company ever grumble, nor the public either, for I always make them merry. I can arrange my pieces just as I please. I chose out of every comedy what I like best, and no one is offended. Plays that are neglected nowadays by the great public were ran after 30 years ago and listened to till the tears ran down the cheeks of the audience. These are the pieces I bring forward. I place them before the little ones, who cry over them as Papa and Mama used to cry 30 years ago. But I make them shorter, for the youngsters don't like long speeches, and if they have anything mournful, they like it to be over quickly.
Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales. We hope you've enjoyed another installment. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember, always, always have sweet dreams.